It's 7 p.m. on Monday, July 8th, 2024, and I will call the City Council's study session to order. We don't have anyone joining us this evening, but as a reminder, there's no public comment taken at study sessions. For the record, Councilmember Peretti and Mayor Pro Tem Whitaker are both absent this evening. For staff, we have Planning Manager Stalnecker, Chief Hernandez, Interim Finance Director Michelle Robeck, and our City Clerk Tricia Summers. I skipped the flag salute. Let's go back to the flag salute. If Councilmember Cedar would lead us.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Council, we have 3 items this evening. The first is on page 3 of your packet. It is an update on our comprehensive plan. I will turn the floor over to Planning Manager Stalnecker.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So on June 12, 2024, the Planning Commission did make a recommendation for the City Council as it relates to the comprehensive plan update drafts. So tonight, Framework is going to go through Volume 1 and Volume 2. We are still a couple things tied to that. The transportation and capital facilities elements weren't completely ready at that point, so we will run them through the Planning Commission as well, but they are included in your information that you'll be getting tonight. Normally what we're bringing to you is code language, so it's very specific and it's pretty close to complete. In this case, the comprehensive plan, partially because of the deadline we're working under, partially because it's more of a visioning document instead of specific code language, is that it is sort of evolving right now, and we are expecting that as we fine tune it, it will occur as we move forward prior to the adoption that is required by December 2024. So obviously you're going to get you've had copies of the draft document, you're going to get an updated copy. I would say focus, if you're feeling like overwhelmed, focus on the goals and policies, as those are the structure that sets everything underneath it. And then also to remember that the concept plan is phase 1. Right now, as of Wednesday, the Planning Commission will start working on phase 2, which is the accompanying zoning development code regulations that need to be done to make sure it meshes with the updated comp plan vision. So, and then of course, those will be brought to council by the end of the year as well. And then we have scheduled or are planning to schedule a public hearing on these documents for council on August 5th. That allows you to get, if there is any comments, early before we get to December. But the expectation is not to adopt right after that, but to see where we're at, see if there's any comments that you want us to continue to work on. So just to kind of get your frame of mind, it's a little bit different than when we're doing code updates. So that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Framework. They're going to give a presentation. They're going to provide you after this meeting that Convio link like they did last time, where you can put comments online. And I also have paper copies that are available. So if you would like that to go with it, you can pick those up after the meeting. So on that note, I'm going to hand it off to Sarah and Jeff.
Great, thank you. So I just have a quick presentation to go through with you all tonight, just to kind of set the scene for where we're at before going through the drafts of Volume 1 and Volume 2. So just as a reminder, this is kind of where we've been up to this point. We started this process quite a long time ago at this point with a pretty extensive community engagement effort, which helped us to develop the community vision, which you have all seen. And then from that community vision, we've been working on sort of 2 separate paths. One is to refine and determine the future land use map. And then the other is to develop the policy that will guide the comprehensive plan. And in both cases, we're working both from the community vision and also from state requirements, which have changed quite a bit for this planning update period. So we're working with a lot of state mandates, and so you'll see as you're going through the plan that it's kind of a hybrid between the community vision and also what's being passed down by the state. So right now we have complete drafts of volume 1 and 2, and as planning manager Stallnaker mentioned, transportation volume 2 and capital facilities volume 2 are both in process still. So this is kind of what it looks like. We're doing parallel volume 1s and volume 2. Volume 1 is where you have background and just brief background to kind of put the plan in context, and then the goals and policies for each element. And then volume 2 is where we're putting a lot of the background analysis and existing conditions that are informing the plan. So right now, we are, again, as was mentioned, starting to work on the development code updates and the SEPA checklist and in advance of December 2024. So one of the biggest things that we're forwarding in this draft is a new future land use map, which has gone through a pretty extensive process through Planning Commission to refine and ensure that it accurately reflects the desires of the commission and people, and that it simultaneously is allowing for the growth that is required by the state. So I wanted to just go back, and one of the biggest mandates from the state is providing more affordable housing. So a lot of the plan is shaped around, and a lot of the land use ideas are kind of shaped around accommodating that growth. So just as kind of a reminder or refresher, this is kind of where we're anticipating a lot of this different growth is going. So in Uptown, we're planning on putting a lot of the affordable housing mandate that we have from the state, which is around 200 units. I'll go forward. 140 units in that 0 to 50 area median income bracket, which includes permanent supportive housing, which is PSH, and non-PSH. PSH includes wraparound services. So that kind of housing can really only be accommodated in apartment-style buildings. So that's why you'll see that there's more density in the Uptown portion of the future land use map. Then we have more middle housing in this gold area and also in the yellow. But at the bottom, you'll see our growth target for housing. And so based on the future land use map that you saw, with a couple refinements that happened in the last month, we have just a little bit of surplus on those 0 to 50 AMI apartments based on the existing buildable lands from Pierce and King County, and then more surplus for low rise and the existing single family. And then in terms of employment, we're doing really well. Our King allocation is 900, Pierce allocation is 441. Most of the King allocation is already in pipeline from the historic quarry site. And you've got, we're anticipating this surplus based on the land use that we're proposing. And then this final slide is just a reminder that the comprehensive planning life cycle is long, and we are really only in this aqua period right here at the beginning. But there will be future periods of where we will be implementing the plan, where we will be monitoring the plan, and then periodically refining it. So a lot of these questions will also be able to be returned to over the life of the plan as we see how it performs.
Sarah, do you mind if I interrupt you just really quick?
Please. Yeah.
Would you prefer, if council has a question as we go along, are they good to ask as we go along, or would you prefer for us to wait towards the end?
Well, we're actually at the end now, and then
Okay.
I can go through the
Okay.
convio. So yeah, I think this would be a great time to pause for questions.
Councilmember Whalen, I saw your hand up.
Well, I just have a few questions. The
Yeah.
material is a little bit new to me. I've seen some of it and so forth. But just a question on page 7. And it's probably something I've heard before, but I'm not sure. What does PSH mean?
It means permanent supportive housing. So
Permanent, I'm sorry.
permanent supportive housing. So it's for folks who cannot necessarily live independently on their own. And so it provides wraparound services like healthcare and counseling within the building.
So permanent supportive housing.
Yes.
Their support for their housing comes from another location. It doesn't come from the city of Milton. It comes from the state of Washington.
It can come from the affordable housing provider or the organization that's.
Yeah, it could be a partnership with a service provider and an affordable housing provider. It could be one agency or entity. But we weren't, I mean, that's not something that we see the city of Milton being directly involved in.
So it's something the city's going to have to do to find support for supporting of the
So
permanent supporting housing.
We have to allow permanent supporting housing. We did this, I believe, last year. This was when we went through, it's the homeless shelters that we had to show that we had capacity for various numbers. So our code currently has the zoning that would allow people to, if an organization wanted to build that type of housing, our code currently allows that. So we could do a partnership, but it's not saying you have to do a partnership. It's saying you have to allow it in your city, which we do.
So this is not a fund or so forth that the city has to put together. We can depend upon or require to depend upon some outside funding source to support this housing.
Yeah, it's not a funding focus. It's are you allowing that type of housing in zoning and in land use?
Okay. So it has to be successful upon itself to be funded by something other than the city.
Yeah, I mean, there are cities that partner, but no, it's not a requirement that we partner. It's a requirement that we allow, again, it's those things like the homeless shelters, it's the day centers, it's transitional housing, it's all of those types of housing, which we went through and adopted all of that, I believe, a year ago.
So it's not a budgeted item that we
No.
have to consider ourselves financing.
No.
Now, what AMI is,
Area median income.
Uh-huh.
Area median income. So that's for Pierce County. It's 0 to 30 would be making 30% of Pierce County's median income, or less.
well, thank you. It helps me make notes
Yeah,
speaking with the
absolutely.
experts. Thank you.
Councilmember Cedar?
Thanks, Mayor. Just looking at the overall map, let's see, I think this is on page 8, so the next slide.
The next slide. This
Yeah.
guy.
The low density 12 dwelling units per acre, that's what's now mandated, correct? So that's the biggest change from where we currently are.
Yeah, yes. And it's also really difficult to estimate because it's units per lot. And so you can't actually determine that until you look at the individual lot size. We have done some kind of case studies, an exploration of what middle housing could look like in terms of opportunities in Milton that we're going to be presenting to the Planning Commission on Wednesday. And we'll be coming back to the commission, the council at a future date. But yeah, that's where that comes from. It's the middle housing requirements.
Okay. I was just trying to understand.
Yeah. So
The-
it's the 2 or more, or 2 buildings per lot, 2 units per lot, or 3 with there's a ADU below that.
And looking ahead, are we going to see an adjustment to our lot size then, as maybe not a direct factor of this, but as part of the comp plan?
We are going to probably recommend some changes just because what we've noticed is that when you look at your 3 residential districts, lot size and density aren't correlated, right?
Yeah.
And so when you apply the new state law, which is numbers of units per lot, and you allow those smaller lot sizes, it gets more dense. So I would say we probably won't recommend drastic changes, but we might just recommend some alignment there.
Great, thanks.
Councilmember Strader?
How are we going to accommodate these numbers? I'm kind of confused about the 238, 12 DU per acre.
Yeah, so that means dwelling units per acre. And at the moment, you have about 5.4 is what Pierce County says is your existing units per acre across residential areas. And so we're kind of creating this higher number based on the assumption of having 2 dwelling units per parcel. So that's why it's upped a little bit.
Part of the challenge is the buildable lands reports that were done by the counties predated the state legislation, so it didn't factor any of that in. And then typically what they do for buildable lands is they rely on historic data. However, the historic data will not reflect the changes in zoning that will go in place. So the first 5 years, I would say, and there's a monitoring report requirement for all cities at the 5-year mark, will be used to collect some of that data and make some potential changes to future capacity estimates. But for now, we think these are reasonable assumptions and are borne out by some of the testing that we've done that I just referenced previously. But it is to say that we're in a bit of some uncharted waters on some of this because it is all so new. And there weren't any changes that really affect Milton, but the middle housing bill's already been amended once just last month. So there could potentially be other future amendments as well.
Could you clarify what the density number is as far as is it the net or the gross? I think they go by gross.
In this case, it's a net number. So it's for housing, when you're looking at residential properties, you're looking at the net acreage. So that's taking out all the environmental constraints. When you're looking at employment, it's a gross number. But so at least that's how Pierce County does it. King County does it a little bit differently, but that's what we're referencing here.
Yeah. And we're only applying those numbers to vacant and redevelopable parcels as well. And those numbers or those parcels were identified again before the state law came out. So even just the number of parcels that are within that bucket is probably severely underrepresenting
Right.
what could actually happen in terms of middle housing because, and again, we'll show this from the case studies, but there's many instances where you could add middle housing without affecting any of the existing units, just simply infilling in vacant areas of lots. And many of those lots wouldn't have shown up to be underutilized. And so aren't necessarily represented in the capacity numbers. So when the city goes for its next periodic update, which will start in probably 7 or 8 years, there will hopefully be a new set of assumptions that can accurately assess the actual capacity. And I think there's ways that you can leverage that without having to make drastic changes in the community to be able to get credit for that capacity in the city. So I think there's going to be some more flexibility going forward. Unfortunately, some of the timing didn't work out well, but as the numbers show, Milton is in great shape. We have a relatively modest, compared to other communities. And we have one community we're working with that has to add 150% of their housing units. They have 3,000 housing units now. They have to add 5,000. So just to put it in perspective, Milton's number, relatively modest through capacity. I think that's a pretty conservative number, but we're still, many times above that. So I think Milton's in really good shape. And we'll just have to see how some of this plays out and make any adjustments in the future.
And just dealing with the whole density conversation, as the changes that the state has done is, again, with those what has traditionally been single-family lots in Milton, it's not going to be so much based on acreage, it's going to be based on how many units per parcel or per lot. Because for anything that you allow a single family, we have to allow a duplex. And for every house, you have to allow 2 ADUs. So it isn't going to be so much on density based on acreage. It's going to be that you can put up to 3 units per se per lot. And so that changes that number and it makes it, it's just a different way of calculating now. And so it's a change of thinking in the way we're have to figure for those traditional single-family lot properties. But like Jeff is saying, our need is 295. We theoretically have capacity for 1,400. So not that we're going to have 1,400 houses, but our figure is we have capacity for that many dwelling units. So we should easily meet what our requirement is. And the requirement is only 295 new houses.
Okay, and about the mid-rise, high-density area where you have, it's basically on Meridian, correct? And what happens if no developer decides to put in that type of housing? Is there a penalty to us for not happening, or is the state or county going to come in and say, no, you need to fix this and make it happen?
I would generally say no. The only instance where it could become an issue is if they felt there was a city policy or some barrier that the city had some control over that was maybe a limiting factor for achieving what we set out to do. So I would say in this case, the example that you provided, it seems probably, relatively unlikely that a shopping center owner would add housing. I mean, it definitely happens, but it's not super frequent, in my opinion. And if the city's put the rules in place and allowed it to happen, there's no penalty to the city. I mean, there could be an economic crash. There could be big changes in the housing market and other factors that have nothing to do with city policy that could impact what development happens. So no, the city is really obligated to set the stage to allow this to happen. Certainly larger cities like Seattle and Tacoma, their involvement in some of these is on a much greater scale and probably have a number of tools that would be outside the reach of a small city like Milton that they can put in place. But no, Milton's really having to set the policy, which is the plan, and then set the regulations to allow it to happen. And there would not be any penalty under those circumstances.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe when we went through this the last time, we did have the right numbers, correct?
What's that?
The numbers for our development plan were looked at by Pierce County, and it was okay with them, the numbers that we presented with our plan. Is that correct?
For this plan?
No, the plan that we submitted before this.
The last one.
In
Yeah.
2015.
Yeah, all the plans have to be certified by PSRC and would have been reviewed by the county. I don't have all of the history because I wasn't involved in that, but this will undergo a not intense, but a detailed review with PSRC for the certification. And King County also has to review the housing plan. And we're actually meeting with them tomorrow for the intake for one of our other clients. So we'll be up to speed on that process. But those reviews are pending, coming over the next couple of months.
Okay. And back to the density, what are those numbers that the state is requiring and county is requiring us to meet? Do we have those?
Yeah, so for King County is the first first row here, then Pierce County, and then the total allocation. And we've had communication with King County, and it's okay if we aggregate the housing into Pierce County. So that's why you'll see that Uptown actually contains some of King County's allocation as well.
was there a slight change to the Uptown addition? Was that expanded? I noticed that the city, or this property, the city is not in that Uptown area, or it doesn't have that color coding. Is there a reason for that? Why this part of the city isn't
why-
considered part of Uptown?
Town
This is Town
center.
center,
Yeah.
near, closer to the town center.
Oh, Town Center, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, Town Center.
We did look at perhaps reducing the size of the town center boundary, but as part of our engagement, we heard from a number of property owners that wanted to retain the commercial and mixed-use opportunities, so we didn't move forward with those. And similarly, we had some changes over on the border with Fife along Highway 99. And similarly, we got some feedback from property owners that the commission weighed and ultimately didn't recommend moving forward with those. So we have made some adjustments based on the input that we've gotten, so.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember White?
I have my microphone at my mouth. What I was going to bring up has already been addressed, but I think it's ridiculous to consider 12 units an acre to be low density. And I think it's unconscionable what the state has done. I think they're going to destroy the character of communities across the state, including this one. I mean, there's nothing we can do about it, but I just want to voice my opposition to what this type of density could do to our community. And it could just totally destroy its character. And I'm happy that we don't have a lot of buildable land, but this has, I mean, a developer could come in and buy existing properties and destroy neighborhoods. And, or not, maybe not, destroy is a bad word, but it could certainly change the character of a neighborhood and take away what makes Milton unique. Which I guess is what the state's trying to do, is they're trying to make everything the same. And I think over time, that's going to be proven to be a huge mistake. And I'm opposed to this, but what can I do? Or what can we do? Thanks.
Councilmember Seaver, before I let you go again, Councilmember Hall, did you have any comments?
He said what I.
Okay. Councilmember Cedar?
Yeah, I just want to comment, because I really appreciate that, Councilmember White, and I agree Milton has a unique character that we're losing here. I think, obviously, we can't do anything to change the density. And so I think what we can do is meet the challenge, because what's going to make it feel more dense if developers come in is if we're trying to accommodate the same car-focused lifestyle, right? It's cars that make the city center traffic, that make the parking lot at Safeway unwalkable. And if we're able to create an area, whether it's uptown or city center, where people can gather on foot and not feel crushed by the density, similar to some of the downtowns that have been created in other smaller cities around here, where there's focus on trails, focus on walkability. I think we can at least meet the challenge with something that makes our city good in some respects, while not totally losing our character of being a place where you can raise a family, say hi to your neighbors, have the support of the police, all these great things about Milton that we have. So that, I agree, and I think this is a challenge that we can meet.
Councilmember Strader, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I would like to echo those thoughts as well. I just think that if there is something that we can do as a pushback on this, I think that we should look into those necessary steps, what we can do, whether we collaborate with other cities and go to the state and say, this is wrong.
I'm just gonna, again, the 12 dwelling units per acre, it's not a goal, and it's not even it's not a goal or a target. It's just sort of the maximum capacity if every single parcel, I believe, went to 3, kind of? Is that the
Yeah, I
idea?
was assuming around what it would look like if you had it. So basically, to get 12 units an acre, you would essentially have to have 3 units on a quarter acre lot. That's essentially what it would be. And, I just wanted to say that can I continue? I don't want to cut you off. but I'll
Nope,
just
go.
say, I really appreciate the comments, and this is something, we've heard with all of our clients and elected officials, and certainly appreciate the concern about having something forced upon the community. But I will say that there is a lot of local decision-making as part of this process. It's not entirely prescribed for each community, and I can say that we're working on maybe 4 or 5 middle housing codes for a number of communities, and we're not taking the same approach with each of them. And I think some of the information that hopefully we'll present to you here soon on some of the examples we've looked at and what the opportunities are in the community will help to bring forth some of those decisions to make sure that this works as best for Milton as it can. And I think, density can appear in different ways. There could even be examples of density where you, from the street, would just look like a house. And some of those can be dealt with through development standards, design standards, and things like that, based on the existing patterns within the community. So just wanted to say we're putting a lot of emphasis and attention to really understand the characteristics of Milton and make it work as best we can for you all, for what it's worth.
Yeah, because it's still people, I mean, it would still, again, we allow ADUs now, and it's not like we have hundreds of houses wanting to add them. There's a few. So it's giving opportunities and stuff. So anyway, on with any other questions or comments?
Councilmember Hall, did you have a comment?
Yeah, when you're adding housing, you're adding tax on your electricity. I mean, you're adding, not tax, but you need sewer, you need water, you need electricity, all of which, Milton is supplying. So we have to really look at, can we add this, but do we have the facilities to maintain this? And traffic is huge right now. As we add, we're going to have to figure out how do we take care of the traffic part. It's just not one-dimensional. And I hate to get to another city that we're next to that I don't think really took that into account. Is how does that affect the outlying communities? How does it affect their way of life? And something like Edgewood, they've maintained the outer part of their community for the apartments. Do we have anything like that in our code where we can keep somebody from coming in and putting an apartment in the middle of a housing, just tearing them down and building an apartment? How do we do that? How do we get a code in there so we're able to we don't want to stop it, but we want to keep the character of the city and grow as we need to, as we're
Sarah, can you put the map back up?
Yeah, for sure.
So
Actually, maybe I'll just get into the big map, if that
yeah.
would be good.
So as you get into the actual document, and we had hit on it, I think, a month or so ago when Framework was here. And again, this is kind of the high-level land use map. The Planning Commission is going to get into more of those specifics, but
Sorry, my computer's frozen. So just try to.
in essence, we will come up with, yes, these are the uses, and so.
Sorry, Angeli.
No, you're
So,
fine.
yeah,
There it goes, it's
It's just
searching.
completely frozen.
Unplug it and plug it
Did
back
it
in.
pull the plug?
Yeah, I pulled the
Oh,
plug.
you
You
pulled
pulled
the
the
Just
plug.
so that you wouldn't
Oh.
have to watch me try to minimize my windows.
Oh, sorry.
Madam Manager Stoniker, can they look at the page
Yeah, what
5
page?
of their packet is the map?
Yes.
Well, it's not. of
Page
their-
5.
Page
So
5 of
Page
their
5 is
packet.
the
If you have the
complete-
packet and you want to look at page 5 while she's looking at the bigger one. So each one of those, so like the neighborhood residential, which is the yellow, which is most of the city and has traditionally been what we've called kind of single-family residential. Again, it will stay at that, we do have to allow duplexes now, and we do have to allow ADUs, but you're not allowing, at this point, unless Planning Commission makes a different recommendation, the intent is not, we're not doing apartments in any of that. It's going to be that low-level, like I said, single-family, duplex, ADUs is the vast majority of those areas. And then we have urban residential would be more of the higher intensity of townhouses, smaller level apartment complexes, maybe your 3-story kind of things. And then the mixed use areas, which they're proposing for Uptown and a few other places, especially Uptown, that's where we could do a much higher, those mixed use kind of things. Because again, as Councilmember Cedar had mentioned, that's where you've got the bus, that's where you've got all your retail, that's where you've got your services. And so the hope is to encourage that to have the opportunity to develop in those ways that would maybe have some more intensity. You could have some higher apartments mixed in with that. Again, trying to protect those neighborhoods. So, and then we've got, let's see, and then also we're going to have these, what we're calling neighborhood centers. We're still fine tuning that. That's what the Planning Commission will work on. But again, those will be sort of more that mix, like lower level, like maybe you have a store or a service and maybe you have one set of apartments above it, kind of that mix, but it's low level stuff. And those will be a few sporadic places. So yeah, that's kind of, and again, when we get to the Convio,
yeah.
you'll be able to get through all detail, and then we also have hard paper copies, depending on how it's easiest to look at. But those are all explained a little bit better. And then what the Planning Commission is working on now is those details of what specifically do we need, what specific is that height, what specific is those coverages, to try to keep those. And it will be some of those for the residential part, is what are those things, that make it so that it looks like it fits.
No, just to say that we've been looking into all of those issues and specifically the issue of appropriate building typologies for each of these zones and making sure that, the apartment buildings are limited to the zones, either where we're proposing them like Uptown or the existing higher density district. But there's some simple controls that we'll put in place for the neighborhood residential that'll keep kind of the small scale character.
Councilmember Whalen?
Thank you, Mayor. All of us have a vision of what we know the city is like, what the size of lots are, what the changes that are even occurring presently and so forth with ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which is densifying some of the lots that we have. They don't always have extra road space to park something, so it's got to go on site. If we had, in our residential areas, we have a lot of lots that are called shy half-acre lots. So I suspect by looking at these numbers, you'd probably put 4 houses. I don't think you get much more than that, because all of these houses have to have on-site parking. There's not enough road in front of a shy half-acre to put in 4 more houses of 8 cars, which a lot of them will have, so that you have to have on-site parking as opposed to street parking. Forgive me, but that's the way the city has been built. Now, those same roads, those same areas and so forth, probably don't have water and sewer capacity to service this building of the houses. we have a lot of inadequate water mains within the city of Milton. So now we have to think about that changes and how that's going to affect the particular neighborhood and the rest of the city. This is a large-scale change to try to condense in 40 minutes with all the thinking that goes along with it and all of our personal experiences that can point out some areas in town where significant changes have to take place. And I'm not sure if we're thinking about all those changes, if it's in this particular plan, how we're going to do that.
Yeah.
Now, it could be something that we're going to have to think about later, but later is wrong. Thinking of it ahead is the right way to do it. So there's a lot of things that we have to find in the complexity of this is, how do we have adequate sewers? If you were to take, let's just take the downtown area around the base of Triangle Park here and so forth, and put in, by the standards that we have here, on an acre, you could have 12 dwelling units. You're talking about independent dwelling units or a residential apartment building?
Well, we were likely to have a limit, like we were just talking about, on the number of units per lot in some of the districts. So if you had an acre lot, the only way you could get the maximum number of units would be to subdivide.
I'm sorry.
Would be to subdivide the lot.
Oh, yeah, would be. But if you had an acre, I'm still having a hard time visualizing putting 12 houses on an acre.
Well, it might not be 12 houses. It might be 4 quarter-acre lots with 2 units on them or 3 units on them.
Well, I'm reading here that, low density, 12 DUs/acre.
Right.
That's
but that
12
doesn't-
dwelling units per acre.
Right. But in order to do the density math, you have to be able to apply it to any size lot. My point is that it wouldn't be 12 units on one lot. It would be the only way to get the maximum number of units would be to subdivide into 4 or more lots and then add the units onto the new lots.
4 more lots and then add 3 houses on each lot.
Yeah, that would be one
Approximately
scenario.
whatever
Yep.
that number.
Yeah, so for example, let's say you had a 1-acre parcel, you created 4 quarter-acre lots, and you put a home and 2 accessory dwelling units. That's now 12 units an acre, but it's 4 lots.
Yeah, and that one particular lot can't accommodate all of those lots parking on the street. It has to be internal parking.
This is something that we address in our context analysis we just looked at, but there's lots of examples of informal and somewhat formal on-street parking in Milton. In some cases, we even saw examples of fairly new developments where they clearly added a gravel strip for parking. I think the default position would be, as you described, they have to provide the on-site parking, but there's definitely lots of street parking that's being used in Milton, and it's a policy decision for the city as to whether they want people to build all of their parking on their individual lot, which adds costs and impervious surface and potential runoff, or to utilize available on-street parking where it's feasible. And it's not always going to be feasible, but in some instances, it can be a solution, part of the solution.
I'm looking at lots that I've, in my neighborhood, with a 90-foot frontage. Usually has one driveway to get onto the property, so you have less than 90-foot frontage. 3 cars is probably a maximum. They're going to park there. But with the density that we're looking at, it's not just 3 cars, it's 10 cars. If each family has 2 cars. I'm just guessing at those numbers, don't hold me to that. I'm trying to see how that integrates into the structure that we have in the city.
Yeah.
There's not 200 feet of parking in front of lots. The lots have got 90 feet minus a driveway, generally.
Yeah. Well, first it depends on what the parking requirement is. And I think that should, ideally vary by the type of unit. If you have a 5-bedroom, single-family home or a 1-bedroom ADU, having those parking standards right-sized. So if you required 2 for principal unit and 1 for each ADU, I mean, most of the single-family homes that I've seen, particularly the newer ones, have at least 2 parking stalls in their driveway and 2 in their garage and possibly more, and maybe some on street. So it's really, again, a policy decision for how the city wants to use that versus requiring on-site parking. But I do think there are opportunities to do both depending on the street, traffic conditions, safety, things like that.
I would like to challenge you with one event.
Okay.
Walk out this door and look across the street and tell me how where there's 4 parking for each house on the street. They're in a driveway and 4 parking. You're not going to get another parking spot in the back of that lot if there's enough room to put an ADU. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, if the lots, but the lots across the street are 5,000 square feet, so they're half the size. It really depends. I mean, the house could be built so there's no room on the lot to add parking in the back. You can't get there. I mean, it depends. There's other sites we looked at. There's plenty of opportunity to provide parking.
So would the city become required to provide on-street parking?
Could the city require on-street parking?
But would the city be required to provide on-street parking if there's not enough parking for all the residents on this density of 12 dwelling units per acre?
If they thought that it was necessary to mitigate parking issues, it certainly could prescribe a certain number of spaces and then have policies or regulations that dictate where those can go. Some cities allow on-street parking to count, some don't. Some require like a little parking study to see what the conditions are on the block. It really depends. I mean, we do this in some neighborhoods where there's literally hundreds of parking spaces sitting there. So from that perspective, and again, it's really going to depend from neighborhood to neighborhood, but let's take a newer subdivision where they built on-street parking throughout the entire neighborhood, but yet everyone's got 4 parking stalls and no one uses the on-street parking, which is a very common thing that we encounter. So the city could choose to require new development to build more parking, but that's going to add costs, environmental impacts, so on and so forth, as opposed to using what is already there. And our recommendation is always to right size the parking. You don't want too much and you don't want too little. And so I think providing a flexible set of tools that the city could apply makes the most sense to me, because in some instances, there's not going to be any on-street parking and it's not going to be feasible to add it. So there's a different solution there. But on other streets, it either already exists or they could easily add it. And I think it's worth considering whether you want to allow that to count towards the requirement or not. And then the final thing I'll say is there is some limitations in the amount of parking that can be required based on the lot size. So if it's less than 6,000 square feet, which these lots across from City Hall, I believe at least some of them are, you can't require more than 1 parking stall per unit. So
I'm just having a hard time visualizing a half acre with 5 houses on it. It could be. I'm going to use it. I'm estimating a half acre. If you think 12 can go on a acre, take a half acre, shy half acre, and you could probably put 6 houses on it.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be houses.
Let me continue.
yeah,
I don't care if it's 5 houses. If they can't accommodate all off-street parking, it's going to impact anybody else in the neighborhood, anybody else in the street. I'm not going to compete for somebody who's putting a little house in the back and parking in front of my property. I'm trying to visualize how this all integrates into an appropriate style like the city of Milton is today,
right.
with the majority of
Yeah.
residential parking on the individual's parking, not depending upon parking in front of your neighbor's lot or across the street, because across the street, they have ditches. So there's no parking on the street on half the houses in the city of Milton on some of these minor streets. It's all going to have to be on the physical property.
Well, I would say, and again, we're going to answer all of these questions when we come back with some of the middle housing work that we've done. But what I have observed when I went out and did some of these site visits is there is on-street parking that's in the right-of-way, that's publicly accessible, that's not on any individual lot, Therefore, it's open for anyone to park there, whether it's in front of their home or not.
I don't disagree with it, but that's not how the people in the city of Milton presently live.
Well,
If-
that's not how
if-
most
if
people
you
live,
have
right?
available parking in front of your house, it's generally unknown, it's generally known that the adjacent property owner who has surrendered that right of way for the benefit of the city and easements for other things, that they utilize it. It's not somebody 3 houses down who can't find a parking spot and come and park there.
Well, yeah.
It's not the city of Milton style today.
Yeah, I understand how neighborhood parking conditions work and people feel a sense of ownership of the spot in front of their home. And I guess one option, which some cities have done, is just simply counting the stall that's in front of your house towards your parking requirement. I mean, that could be, so you're not counting stalls that are down the block, but your lot frontage is 80 feet wide and your driveway is 20 feet, you have an extra 70 feet. You want to give them credit for those 2 on-street parking spaces? I mean, that's another approach that many cities have done as well.
I'm afraid that a lot of the answers we're going to get are going to come back to us in September or the end of August, and you're not going to have time to get all this through council. The answers just don't seem to be ready. It doesn't make much sense. We're at the end of the road.
So,
I'm speaking to this gentleman. If-
well,
are-
Councilman Whalen, this right now is the comprehensive plan, so it's the goals and policies. We start with the planning commission on things like parking, on things like setbacks. We're starting that on Wednesday. So I'm sure the planning commission has the same concerns, and we will be discussing that and working on that over the next couple months. So your concern is duly noted, and it is definitely something that the planning commission will be looking at, is what are we allowed to do for parking requirements? And again, there are still setbacks. It's not like you can cover the whole lot. So tonight's topic is really not, the parking standards and stuff we will be addressing as we get into the zoning standards, which again, we start on Wednesday. So I appreciate your concerns, and it definitely will be something we will be discussing with the planning commission.
I suspect I'll attend quite a few of those commission meetings.
Just make sure we don't have a quorum and you guys are discussing if you all want to. But Councilmember White, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just have a quick question for Angeli. The new development that's behind the post office, what is the units per acre of that development? Do you know offhand?
I know.
Because that is incredibly dense. And
Well,
I just wonder if that is what 12 units per acre looks like.
So first of all, they are in what's called the multifamily zone, so they were allowed to be tighter and closer. They don't have the same setbacks that you would be required to have in currently the RS zone. Let me see. They are allowed. So they're considered 12 net density dwelling units per acre. But they are, again, because the way it's designed, they weren't subdivided. They're considered townhouses / a binding site plan. So their lot size is not much more than the house. And then they have shared space. So it's not necessarily an accurate comparison because they're allowed to be very squished together. Where if in the rest of it, they're gonna, like I said, in the RS, right now right now, if you just took what we have now and now say, okay, you can add duplexes or 2 ADUs, you still have to have an 8,000 square foot lot. You still have to have 20 square foot setback in the front, 25 in the back, 7.5. You can only cover 40%, I think it's 40% of the lot with structures. So by the time you do all those, you are shrinking how much can be there. So theoretically, yes, if you put you could put a small house and 2 smaller ADUs maybe, but you're definitely not putting the scale that you put at what's behind the post office, because those, again, were in a multifamily zone, so they were allowed to have much greater coverage and tiny little lots. Their setbacks are very small, so they're all tight together. You're not going to have that in the, what we're calling the neighborhood residential zones.
So ultimately, in the RS zone, you wouldn't really see 12 units per acre, even though it's designated that way, because you're allowed to create.
Exactly, like you could, some of the larger single-family homes that are 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, I mean, someone could go and convert part of the interior of the home to 2 units and the look would not look any different. And I think, you know, the other thing you need to keep in mind is density is, it's not a very prescriptive term, even though it feels like it, because 12 units an acre could be 12 5,000 square foot single-family homes, or it could be 12 800 square foot apartments. I mean, those are all the same density, but visually, they're completely different. So that's the exercise we're going to go through with you, and go through some of those examples and show what it would look like, and then craft the standards to get the best outcomes that you would like. So.
And when you look at the houses across the street that we were talking about, if you look, they've covered they have no, I mean, they could take the existing house and theoretically chop it into 3, rent this section, rent that section, but they'd have no capacity to add any detached ADUs. Their setbacks are maxed, the house is there. So there's a lot of properties that are, the smaller properties are like that. They have a big house. Unless they want to chop up their interior, they don't have the capacity to build anything else because they're already maxed out on their size.
So are you saying that what the state has done is required us to have a 12 unit per acre zoning, but allows us to regulate it such that you could never do that?
So the state isn't telling us we have to have 12. What the state is saying is we have to allow 3 units per lot. So when we look at our 8,000 square foot lots,
Okay.
now some cities have 5,000 square foot lot minimums. So if you put 3 houses, 3 units on a 5,000 square foot yacht, your density is actually going to be even higher if everyone did that. So again, it's the dwelling units per acre is somewhat deceiving, because really what they're saying is we have to allow the development within our standards of 3 units per lot. But it says we can have, as long as we're doing the same for one single family house as we do a duplex, as we do an ADU, we still get to have setbacks, we still get to have lot coverage. So basically we go and say, you have 40% of this lot, you have to subtract out this. So within this square, you can put 1 giant house, you can put 1 medium house and an ADU, or a smaller house and 2 ADUs. You kind of get to choose within that area, but the same requirements are for everybody. They don't toss them. They don't get to come to us and say, well, I've maxed out, but I want an ADU, you have to let me. No, this is the allowed of area that you have per this lot. You get to decide if it's 1 house, 2 units, or 3 units, if that helps.
Okay, well, thanks for the clarification, because when I was looking at that, I was thinking of that development, and I can tell you that I'm sure there's obviously a market for it, but I would never want to live in a development like that, personally. The cars don't even fit on the driveway. There is no sidewalks because the cars, there's not enough, the cars, when they're parked in the driveway, take up the sidewalk, so.
Yeah, and the standards that they were allowed to do are not allowed in the majority of Milton. Those standards are because they're in that multifamily zone, which the intent is to have higher intensity.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Councilmember Strader?
in your comprehensive plan, are you factoring in what the cost or what the estimated drain or expansion of our public services that are going to have to occur, water, power, electricity, or sewer, the public, the police, fire, all of the public services that it's going to have an effect on with all of these so-called bodies coming in?
Yes, that is addressed in the capital facilities plan, and that's a requirement via the state. We have to develop our 6-year capital facilities plan in order to meet or strive to meet our levels of service that we've established. And the amount of growth that we're planning for, the growth target, is not impacted directly by the middle housing bill. And I think the experience of communities that have adopted this has actually been more on the, I don't know how I would put this, but they haven't seen the levels of development that people might have anticipated. It's been a pretty modest uptick, if at all, in development.
For the intermission.
Wake up the council.
We needed to laugh anyway.
That's the
Yeah.
only one that can get away with it.
So that is to say, we wouldn't expect this to be a big change in the equation of the pace of development here. With that said, yes, we do address that in the capital facilities plan.
Prime Minister Stalnaker, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that when a new development comes in, we have to say, yes, we can support your services as far as utilities go. So if a new development came in and we didn't have the capacity to serve them water-wise, we would not be able to permit it.
Correct.
Yes, and we actually were just having a conversation, the Public Works Director and I, with Pierce County Sewer, because they're aware that as development comes, they were asking us, where we see greater intensity expected. So for that, we talked about the ADUs and duplexes, and they said, that's fine, that capacity is fine. We talked more about, if we're allowing higher density along Meridian, that those are the things they need to look at to see if they need to improve lines. Yes, and every dwelling unit, I think the way it is, you're paying those hookup fees. You're buying into the system for every dwelling unit. So if you want a duplex instead of a single family, then you are paying double for hookups and impact fees. You're paying, I think right now we have it at 50% impact fees for ADUs, because the idea is that those are, they're limited on how big they can be, and most likely they're just going to be 1 or 2 people. So they still, again, anyone who wants to develop those, there is a cost and there is contribution to the city's facilities. And there is the requirement, and that's part of why PSRC, Puget Sound Regional Council, looks at it, is to make sure that we are taking into account what services need to be expanded. Do we have the capacity in those areas, and plan for that, so.
Any other questions for Sarah, Jeff, or our planning manager? Okay, thank you both for your time this evening.
Very much,
And just
appreciate
to
it.
let you know that as you get through, I'm assuming she's going to give you have one last slide.
Yeah, maybe I could just
So
walk through the
as
Columbia real quickly.
The city council has suggestions, thoughts, if there's anything, and we already know of a couple things that we feel should change other than just normal grammar corrections and stuff. We will bring it back to council probably at different points for like consensus, like, yes, we agree, this suggestion was made by a council member. Yes, there's consensus. We agree that wants to be changed, or no, there's not consensus. So this is coming back as you get to dig in deeper to the actual document. One last
Yes.
thing for Sarah, and then we're done.
So just to orient you all to the Convio, which is our way of sort of aggregating all of your comments. You can either, as Anjali said, write directly on a PDF and we can aggregate them, or this is a pretty efficient way for us to kind of see your comments and also for you to be able to respond to each other and potentially upvote if you like somebody's suggestion, that type of thing. So the first thing that's here is a map, which is really about orienting you to what we're looking at. This is kind of a select number of layers, but it shows the parcels, it shows which ones are redevelopable as these ones that are hatched. It shows different boundaries, different transportation, including sidewalk access. It includes some utilities, parks, and existing land use. So you can kind of see why we've kind of come to the conclusions, both us and the Planning Commission, that we have in terms of the future land use map. And then the plan itself is here. What I would suggest, there's this full screen icon here. You can click into it and you can go through the document. You'll see this little, where my cursor is, you'll see this plus sign. You can click on the document and write a comment and post it. And we'll be able to see all of your comments and address them as we go through. So if anyone has any questions about how to work with this program, I know Angeli can help, and if she can't help, then she can pass you on to me and we can have a conversation.
And we're going to send that email out.
The email will be out by tomorrow.
Okay.
And then I've got, again, hard copies I will hand out after the meeting. And yes, I'm available for one-on-one conversations, meeting in person, helping out if you need a computer. And Sarah's been great. Also, she can get on with you live, and help walk you through if you need help figuring out stuff out. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Council, moving on to our second item this evening. It's on page 17 of your packet. It is a first quarter of 2024 budget report and update. I will turn the floor over to our interim finance director, Robeck.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We'll be presenting the first quarter report fund by fund as usual, but please let me know if you have any questions or need any additional information as we go along. The baseline for activity in the operating funds is 25% of budgeted amounts, and we'll be addressing any significant variances from this target as the funds are presented. So I'd like to start with the general fund on page 19. The general fund revenues are a little lower than budget at 19.5%. This is primarily due to lower than anticipated sales taxes. Licenses and permits and charges for services, however, are higher than budget with increased building and planning revenues. Miscellaneous revenues are also higher than budget as a result of better than anticipated interest revenue. And that's one thing that you will see, this trend in miscellaneous revenues for most of the funds presented tonight as well. So across the board, you'll see higher than anticipated interest revenue. For the expenditures, the general fund expenditures are also a little lower than budget at 20.9%. Administration and finance and legal services are negative amounts due to the indirect cost allocation. These categories will likely change to positive amounts as the year progresses. Other admin and personnel is higher due to the annual workers' comp retro program membership fee. That's all in there right now. Other central services is higher due to annual expenditures, including insurance, memberships, and dues. As a result, this category should not increase much more as the year progresses because it's already has most of those expenditures in it that are annual amounts. Non-expenditures is a negative amount primarily due to timing issues. This category contains several clearing accounts with expenditures distributed throughout the year. Does anyone have any questions on the general fund? Okay. I'll move on to the asset replacement and capital reserve fund on page 20. The revenue activity in this fund includes interest and budgeted transfers in from the general fund. Expenditure activity in this fund includes the purchase of 2 police vehicles. Moving on to the street fund, 101 on page 21. You'll see that revenues in the street fund look good and are slightly above 25%. But street maintenance expenditures are slightly above 25% as well. This is primarily due to a $10,000 railing repair expenditure and the related reimbursement revenue. So both the revenue and expenditure in the same amount are kind of bumping up those percentages there. On the next page, the rainy day fund, 103. There's not much activity in this fund. Revenues are slightly higher than 25% and include interest and budgeted transfers in from the general fund. The drug seizure fund on page 23, not much activity, so I don't have any comments on that one. And the criminal justice fund on page 24. The criminal justice fund looks good with revenues and expenditures both at 25%. Dispatch and animal control services are higher than the previous year, primarily due to payment timing differences. And law enforcement expenditures are higher than the previous year, primarily due to higher insurance rates and wages. Does anyone have any questions on the criminal justice fund? Okay. I don't have many comments on the next fund, the Community Events Fund 116 on page 25. There's just not a whole lot of activity yet in that fund. On pages 26 and 27, the REIT funds, these funds both look really good with revenues already surpassing annual budget amounts. These monies are from real estate sales within the city and can be used to fund eligible capital projects in the future. Moving to the Traffic Impact Fee Fund on page 28. The Traffic Impact Fee Fund looks good as well, with revenues already surpassing annual budget amounts. And I just wanted to note that these monies can be used to fund eligible capital projects in the future as well. The Parks Impact Fee Fund on page 29. Park impact fees are currently lower than budget and the previous year, but it's still early, and just wanted to point out that there are no transfers out included in this 2024 budget, so all we'll see is revenue coming into this fund for the year. The Capital Improvement Fund on page 30, just wanted to point out that revenues and expenditures in the Capital Improvement Fund and all the capital funds, the electric, water, and storm, they're project related and don't generally trend like the operating fund. So you can't look at that 25% threshold because it's project related. Larger expenditures in this fund to date include expenditures for the State Route 99 Portaway Intersection Improvements Project and the Miscellaneous Street Overlay Project. Yeah. Councilmember Seaver.
Yeah, thanks, Finance Director Ropeke. That was actually the exact question I had, which is about tracking these trends, because I understand they're project-based. So what is our mechanism to foresee that we're either going to come in over or under budget, probably over budget for some of these capital improvements? Like how will we know that in advance, if at all?
That's a really good question. I think you just kind of have to, it is also, some of these are also seasonally related. So you would expect that for the first quarter, January, February, and March, they're going to have less activity, and you'd expect that activity to pick up in the summer. So it really is kind of like the second and third quarter where you can see more of what those projects are going to look like, because then again, in the winter, the fourth quarter, that will drop off. So this time of year is where we're really kind of paying attention to those, making sure that those are looking good. And Director Madden also, has an eye on all those, making sure that he's staying under budget for project.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm kind of getting at is, we occasionally will have these contract amendments that are over the threshold where it can be approved by the mayor, and it comes back to us. And sometimes I think there's been kind of some comments throughout my time here where it's like, hey, we kind of feel like we have to approve this because we owe the money now. And I'm wondering if there's a way to foresee that. So for instance, with this, capital improvement fund, when we have still nearly $5 million that I'm sure is allocated. Like we have projects to do with that. Is there a way for us to just like, I mean, can you think of any other way? Like it's obviously a lagging indicator, so it doesn't, I mean, maybe the best resource is Director Madden and talking about big projects with periodic updates or something. Is that realistic? I don't know.
Yeah, he definitely has his kind of finger on the pulse of those projects, but you know, if it would be beneficial to present the capital project funds differently, like actually a listing of the projects with individual projects with budget and actual for these sort of reports, that is something that we can incorporate. I've thought about that before, that we're in these reports, historically, we've just kind of lumped all the projects in this one capital expenditures line. Maybe that would be something to consider if you all think that would be of value.
And I will tell you what would be valuable or at least informative for me. So, you know, every year when we do the budget, we see the capital improvements projects in a list and the large money amounts kind of tallied up, and it's very exciting to see that. And then the next year maybe we'll see the same projects there. And I know we have that money budgeted, and it would be very informative for me to kind of see how it plays out during the year, like where the money is going or not going on those big lists. We can see what projects we're ticking off and which ones are getting pushed, rather than just having kind of the annual update with the budget. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
That makes complete sense.
So I don't know if that's realistic or something we could maybe incorporate somewhere in these reports. That would be really cool for me.
And maybe that's a thought too, is have the basic report the same, but then kind of add a supplement for the capital project, the main capital project funds, the Fund 310, and then electric, water, and storm, a listing of the projects and how the budget spent to date.
Yeah, and I mean, Storm's not very exciting. So really, it's those three. But yeah, but Storm is big, I guess. So, okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So you think that would be a value maybe to bring back with the next one?
I think it'd be valuable. Maybe if we could try it, if it doesn't create a ton of workload, and it's something that we could do and see if it's useful for council.
Yeah, I mean, and we can talk to Director Madden, because I think it's going to be a little bit behind. So maybe we need a little more like current. Like when you're doing the quarter reports, we're a little behind, right? Like her reports are from
Yeah.
March. Director Madden, I do know, so like the amendments sometimes I send, he approves those because it's in a threshold he can before. So like a lot of times it doesn't go over the initial budgeted amount for the project in the budget, right? So like, let's say we budget 50,000, you guys approve 40, and we have to do another 1,000, we're still within the capital improvement budget. And we are a bottom line budget. So he might go, okay, well, that one went over 5,000, so we know we're gonna take a little bit out of this one, which hasn't really happened because we're just not there yet.
Yeah.
But I will say that this year we are making like really rapid pace. Like we are checking off boxes for a lot of these projects with the addition of Val to the team. But I think I understand what you're asking for, and I think that's something that's easily doable. I don't know if it's good with the quarterly updates because it's so far behind. Not, you know, like you want current updated information.
I do, and I completely, this is just a good end for that discussion, I thought.
Yeah.
But if you understand what I'm saying, or if you have any further questions, I'd be
Yeah.
happy to chat about
Okay.
it. But
Yeah, I don't think
Thank
there's any issue with having Director Madden do a, mid-year update on where we are with projects.
yeah, I think that'd be really helpful for us, because I
Okay.
think we kind of get surprised and when we get to the budget retreat and see the same things recur, or we're just, the cost of something is maybe unexpected when we thought it'd be one thing.
I understand.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on to the electric utility fund on page 31. Revenues in the electric utility fund look good at 31.5%, with charges for services exceeding the previous year by about 67,000. Expenditures also look good at 20.7%. You will notice that interfund transfers are slightly higher as a result of higher revenues. On page 32, the Electric Capital Improvement Fund, there is currently not much activity in this fund, but the largest expenditures to date are for the miscellaneous cable replacement project. The Water Utility Fund on page 33. Revenues in this fund are only slightly below budget at 24.2%, with charges for services exceeding the previous year by about 62,000. Expenditures look good as well at 20.1%. The Water Capital Improvement Fund on page 34. There is currently not much activity in this fund as well. The largest expenditures to date are for the new deep well and storage facility improvements projects. The Water Asset Replacement Fund on the following page, 35. I don't really have many comments on that because there's not a whole lot of activity there. The Stormwater Utility Fund on page 36. Revenues in this fund look good at 25.3%, and expenditures look good as well at 22.8%. The Stormwater Capital Fund on page 37, there's currently not much activity in this fund either, but the largest expenditures to date are for the citywide ditch and culvert project. The next fund on page 38, the Stormwater Asset Replacement Fund, not a whole lot of activity in there, so I don't have any comments. And the same with the Electric Asset Replacement Fund on page 39. The Vehicle Repair and Replacement, Vehicle Repair and Maintenance Fund on page 40. Expenditures in this fund are below budget at 19.8% and are very similar to the previous year. Revenues in this fund are based on internal work orders and will catch up to expenditures throughout the year. And lastly, the Information Technology Fund on page 41. Expenditures in this fund are slightly above budget at 32.7%. This is primarily due to a few large annual payments for renewals of licenses and subscriptions. And revenues in this fund are based on cost allocations and posted to the fund in equal amounts each month. That's all I had for my presentation. If anyone has any questions or needs some additional information.
Nope, thank you.
So moving on to our last item this evening, it's on page 43 of your packet. It is ordinance 2087-24 regarding the update to Milton Municipal Code in regards to parks. I will turn the floor over to Chief Hernandez and then discuss after.
Good evening, council and distinguished guests. What you have before you tonight is proposal for an addition to the Milton Municipal Code 12.16.105, and attached is ordinance 2087-24. And this was done because, as you see in the discussion, we have had requests from private citizens to use bouncy houses in our city-owned parks on city property. After having discussions with WCIA, which is our insurance provider, they suggested that we put a few restrictions on using inflatable structures in city property. And so the first one, if I call your attention to actual section A, no inflatable structures are allowed within parks of the city without permission from the city. A signed indemnification agreement between the city and the applicant in the form approved by a city attorney, proof of liability insurance from the applicant. And then B, all inflatable structures permitted under this section must be rented from vendors that are approved on a Washington State Labor and Industries list, and no personally owned inflatable structures are allowed within the city parks. And so my suggestion to council is that they move or discuss this ordinance and move forward on protecting the city.
I just want to add to that, when I look at A and B, with the exception of an agreement between the city and approved by the city attorney, this is how we handle all bouncy houses that we use as a city. So these are the requirements that we have on ourselves as well, minus getting the city attorney approval prior. Councilmember Whalen?
Thank you, Mayor. Well written. Look forward to seeing it next week.
Councilmember Strader?
Are there that many requests to have bouncy houses on our parks?
Yes.
The
The answer is
request-
yes.
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 Request comes in, city clerk processes those requests, and then they get passed around to the leadership if there's varying things that need to be looked at by the different directors. But yes, we do get that request, and if you want to see how scary it can be, just YouTube bouncy houses floating away.
And I would say probably more on our rentals too, especially when we had the community building open for rentals, we would get requests for bouncy houses. And we didn't have any policy set, so it's kind of hard to enforce something that you don't have. Plus you get complaints from neighbors, so. Any other questions? Councilmember Cedar?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to just prohibit the ones that are personally owned as well. They seem to be very popular in the community now and growing, and those are high risk. My question is about the infraction process. It looks like this would be classified, I think if I'm reading this correctly, as a civil infraction with a $125 penalty. Is that correct, Chief, or do you know how this would track?
Let me. He did not assess a penalty when having that conversation with Andrew.
It doesn't seem to have a specific one. So the way I had tracked it was through, Title 12 in our code. Oh, excuse me, not Title 12, what's the parks? Yeah, 1216. And then that has violations of penalties, which shall constitute a misdemeanor. But then when you look at our code compliance procedures under the reference section, it seems a little bit vague. So maybe, yeah, Plan Manager Stolnick, if you know, like what the code violation, because this would be a code violation, right? So a civil versus criminal act,
Right, and it says.
of course.
Any person violating, as you stated, shall be constitute a misdemeanor, and conviction thereof shall be punishable as set forth in chapter section 1.8.
What does 1.8 say? Just because I don't have a computer in front of me.
Teach me to bring my computer. Yeah, 1.8 gives us, so we could, yeah, so it's like it gives us multiple options.
Yeah, and that's what I'm looking at. I think in 1.08.120, we see that it seems to suggest violations set forth in Title 12
Yeah,
are,
it's set as a 125 monetary penalty, which is a class 2 civil infraction, and a 250 monetary penalty for each violation after. So
Yeah.
that means we could write a ticket, is that?
We could write a ticket, yeah. I mean, yes, that's
Yeah.
definitely what it says, is we could write an infraction.
and I imagine that I'm just trying to think of how this would look from an enforcement perspective, because I imagine, you go out first, if they do it in violation of having talked to the city, you go out, issue them a ticket, they refuse to comply, well, that's going to escalate it immediately to something else beyond that, right?
Well, at that point, it would be, okay, we're rescinding your permit, and you're gonna have to leave the premises.
Yeah, you know what, that's the step I was missing, and I think that addresses my concern, which is that there's enough of a deterrent factor here.
Yeah.
Great, thanks very much.
And please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've had like a bouncy house just pop up at the park. It's more that, one, our insurance company has asked us to look into this, and two, we get requests. But I can't think of an incident, at least since I've been here, that we've had random bouncy houses in the park.
I've seen
I mean, I think.
Oh, you have? Okay, well, they just haven't been reported then. I should
I think
rephrase
the way
that.
that it mostly got started, though, is the city wanted to have bouncy houses, and so then we had a conversation with our insurance, and they said, this is how you should do it. You should be using people that are on the labor and industries list. If you don't, then you're creating this liability to the city. And then, oh, by the way, if you don't currently have this in code, you should put it in code so that the city is not liable for allowing something. In the end, it would end up being an attractive nuisance or to go onto city property, and then we should have known and we should have regulated it, but we didn't. And the bouncy house flew away with a 12-year-old in it or whatever, and you were negligent because we knew this was an issue.
Councilmember Hall?
And then how would we post that? I mean, would we post that in the park? Because I have seen him at birthday parties.
Which park are you referring to? Milton Community?
Lower part,
Oh, in the middle part?
above, yeah,
We could put it in
above
our,
where the playground was.
put it on our website under the parks.
I mean, we can add another sign, but those, I mean, there's so many signs now.
But
I
a lot
mean-
of times it's like anything else.
No bouncy house with a slash.
Yeah, I mean, are they doing it like near the gazebo area? Is that where you've seen it before?
Yeah, it was above where the playground was.
Oh, so the
on
middle, okay,
Lower part.
yeah.
It was a birthday party. You could tell it was a birthday party.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Just more out. We can do, bring it up at Milton Days and have something at the city booth for sure. Put it on our website. We can put in the newsletter. We could, I mean,
I'd hate for somebody to rent one and not realize it.
And we might need to add to our park rules the sign that says no alcohol, dogs on leashes,
Yeah.
no bouncy houses.
no fun.
No alcohol for the dogs.
Yeah, no fun
No
zone.
fun zone.
Unless you're approved by the city through permit process. Yeah, we can look at, one, we'll educate, right? We'll do our best to educate the public. At the end of the day, though, there's lots of things that people ignore or don't seek out the information prior to doing. And it's, I'm going to do it and then,
Well, I've been
See what
noticing
happens.
that on Facebook that it's heavily advertised that you can rent them for a couple $100 or
yeah.
$150.
Well, and we can also reach out to the vendors that we use, which the one is local, and let them know that if someone asks you to rent at the park, this is the process, or it's not allowed
Yeah.
after this has gone through. So. Okay. Everyone's good, though? Yeah? Okay. Perfect. Seeing that all the items tonight have been concluded, I will call for a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Being that it's been moved and seconded, is there any objection? Meeting